everybody. Welcome to our January meeting for FWAS, Fort Worth Astronomical Society. And again, it's virtual since we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and hopefully things will get better and we'll be in person soon. I do want to say welcome to everybody, especially to our new members, and we still do continue to get new members. The ones who have joined since our last meeting are the Mike Rusher family, Jim Potts and his family, Bobby Darr and his family, Aaron Ipser and his family, AJ Draz, or maybe it's Straws, his family has joined, Christina Slavanik, her family has joined, and then Tom Benthall is a new member. So we're continuing to grow. I'd like to say thank you to all the board members. Most of them, I believe, are already signed on here. I'm your president. Ed Gill is the vice president, and he's the one who helps arrange our programs. John Geromini is our treasurer. Tom Roth, Cy Simonson, Jerry Gardner, and Larry Barker are all our general board members. And the secretary position is still open. If we have someone who's been in at least a year who would like to volunteer for that position, that would be great. For those of you who are new, or those of you who have, this is your first meeting, a little bit of our club history. The Fort Worth Astronomical Society is one of the first adult amateur astronomy clubs that's been formed in the country, and it was actually founded by Charlie Mary Noble in 1949, and it grew out of a junior astronomy club when so many parents became interested with their children, and they expressed an interest in astronomy. Currently, we have 162 members and their families, and this year we have seen a lot of families join, and so that's great to know. We invite your participation, and our club members do bring a wide range of experience, anywhere from beginners to the professional astronomers. And one of the things I've always considered a strength in our club is the varied interests that we each have, from binocular viewing to photography. We have many members who are willing to help with any questions you may have, and we also encourage outreach whenever it's possible, even if it's setting up your telescope in your driveway and getting the neighbors to come look at the moon. Now, due to the current societal situation, we are not conducting in-person star parties at this time. Chris Medlinky has conducted several virtual star parties, and he will gladly accept help if you would like to co-host or learn how to host one on your own. Our club is a nonprofit organization, so please feel free to make donations. Those donations can be claimed on your yearly tax filing. Our club currently has 2 dark sky sites that are available for viewing and for astrophotography. We currently have access to each of them. New members should never go to either of the sites without first teaming up to visit with a seasoned club member. And that's so that we can teach you the ropes and show you where things are and show you how things work. One of our sites is in Decatur, Texas. It's the Thompson Foundation land. Electricity is available at that site. A restroom is available. During the winter, you know, sometimes they do have to cut the water off when it gets to freezing temperature. So you do need to be aware of that if you go out in the middle of winter. The gate code was changed a couple of months ago, and you can see the files in the iOS group for that new code. Second site is in Ranger, Texas, Star Ranch. In that site, you have electricity provided via solar panels. There is a composting toilet available. Water is not available, so those of you who are smokers, please be very careful. If you camp out overnight at Star Ranch, be careful with any, stoves that you might be using. There was a new lock put on the gate that goes off the road a few months ago onto the easement. The new code, again, is in the iOS group, and apparently we continue to have an issue. A lock should lock to a lock, not 2 chain segments. I don't know that it's our crew or our members that are doing that, but we've had several people who've not been able to enter because the FWAS lock has been taken out of the loop. The owner of the property does have several people who access that property, and so it's more than likely somebody from one of those groups that doesn't quite get it to work right. We will be reaching out to Preston Starr. He is the owner of that property that we use at Star Ranch, and we'll ask him to discuss with the owner about having extra links put in there so that it's each lock connects link to link, and that way at least our lock should not ever be taken out of the grouping. So hopefully that will avoid this problem. When you are at either of the dark sites, we do ask that you please remember that others are around. Some of them do bring their children with them, but profane language should never be used if you can avoid it at those sites. For right now then, let's see, is Ed Gill on here? Mm-hmm. Okay, Ed is going to go ahead and introduce our presentation. I think he's been working on a group of presentations by some of our group members, so it'll be very interesting to see this. General information, each of you does have the ability to unmute yourself. Just for clarity and to prevent any accidental noise coming through, go ahead and keep yourself muted unless you are speaking, and that way everybody should be able to avoid anything happening or getting overrun with somebody else's noise. Okay, Ed, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Michelle. And first of all, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because it's sometimes hard to tell. All right, so I'm going to be sharing a screen. I'm going to do a presentation tonight that is essentially what I would call the tour through the universe by Fort Worth Astronomical Society. And let me see if I can do a share screen and share. And let me, okay. And do I still have audio, and do you have the visual slide up on the screen? All right, perfect. All right. What I'm going to do through this presentation is flip through the slides, and when we come to a photograph by one of our club members, I will ask them if they wish to speak to that particular photograph, what they did, anything interesting, about the capture equipment they used, whatever they want to talk about. And I know some will either are not going to be on the meeting or are not available, so there may not be a discussion on their photographs. So without much ado at this point, this is a photo tour through the universe by the Fort Worth Astronomical Society. And I'll be giving credits to each one of the photographers. And we're going to start our tour close to home to show the scope of and the range of celestial objects within the reach of our equipment, and bring to focus the talents of our Fort Worth Club members. And I'm not going to ask you to excuse the puns, they were intentional. So let's start at the center of our solar system. Mr. Steve Yates has a beautiful picture of the sun with one of the very few times that we had sunspots, and we're in the solar minimum, so it's not often that we'll see it. And Steve, did you want to unmute and talk about your photo? All right, I don't know if Steve is on. So what I do know, what Steve told me was he used essentially a all-in-one camera, a modified point and shoot with a telephoto lens and a white light solar filter, I believe, on his camera. And so it was relatively modest equipment by most standards. And this is one of the points I'm going to try to make throughout the presentation for folks that have just acquired a telescope, our new members. What do they? What can they do? What can they see? And so we'll move on to the next photograph. And I'll talk to this one since it's these are mine. One of the first things we probably focus on or use our telescopes for is the moon. It's one of the easiest things to see and provides a lot of interesting detail. And the two photographs I included here, the one on the left, the half moon there, is a mosaic of photographs that I took with a mirrorless camera attached to my Maksutov catadioptic telescope. And the photograph on the right is of the lunar X, which is a phenomenon that occurs only for a few hours. And it's, I don't know if you can see my cursor. It's right there in the middle. I'm kind of running around it. And to see some of the interesting details with, again, relatively modest equipment, you can see a tremendous number of details on the moon. And because of the shadows and light play on the moon, it's often very, very interesting. Also, the lunar V is over in the main picture is visible right up where my cursor is right now. Again, I'm not sure whether you can see my cursor or not, but it's up here. Okay, now we'll move out from the moon to comets. And Kurt Lewis had this picture of Comet Neowise. And Kurt, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, yeah, this is just a single frame taken with a stock DSLR with a 85 millimeter lens on a simple tripod, just a camera tripod. So I think it was a 2-second or 4-second exposure. I don't have the particulars in front of me, but it's something anybody could do with any camera, really. I shot it from Thompson, so I had a dark sky to work with, and I was pretty happy that right out of the camera I could see the ion tail as well as the dust tail. And that's pretty much it. Just open the shutter for a couple of seconds until you got something that shows up on the view screen on the camera, and there it is.
All right. Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that. Beautiful photograph, by the way. And Jerry, this is another comet. This is an earlier one, about 5 years ago. This is Lovejoy, and this is a comet through a telescope. Jerry, do you want to talk to this one? I can barely hear. I can hear you in the background, but I don't have a good. Can't hear what you're saying.
Is that any better?
No. Okay. Well, we got audio difficulties. I'll go ahead and flip on to the next one, and hopefully, because Jerry has a number of photographs in the presentation, so I'd like to get his comments. Jerry, have you worked out your audio? Okay. All right. Keith Frost has this photograph of Mars. And Keith, are you on? Okay, Keith's not on. I don't think he's on, but he did send me the particulars. He used a 12-inch Ritchie Chrétien at f/40. And that's one of the challenges of planetary photography is you need a lot of magnification. I used, although the telescope is a big telescope, and but the camera was a small 120 MC ZWO. Often we use these for guide cameras, but they work out well for planetary work. And this was a stack of 410 frames. So planetary photography has its challenges, and they're different from deep sky. But again, nice photograph of Mars by Keith. And then I'm going to toot my horn again here. This is one I got of Jupiter. This year we had a couple of events with planets. We had, of course, the conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn earlier in the summer, and then we had the great conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn close, and we'll get to that in a minute. Again, this was taken with a Moxitov, a 7-inch Moxitov, and I think I was working at f/30 on this with a Barlow on, again, a mirrorless camera, a little micro 4/3 mirrorless camera, and just snapping pictures with a cable release. And then this is one of Saturn, pretty much the same setup. But again, from our light polluted skies, some of the planets and the moon and the sun are, if you're working out of your backyard, these are some of the best objects to be looking at through your telescope, through your new telescope, or showing your kids through your telescope. Saturn always brings a oohs and ahs. And then this is the Great Conjunction. Jim shot the one on the right on the 23rd, and I took the two on the left on the 19th and the 21st. And I put these up so that you can see the position of Saturn as it was north of or up above Jupiter on the 19th, and then you can see how it moved over very close to Jupiter on the 21st, which was the date of the conjunction. And then you can see how it's moved down lower. And let's see if I don't know if that's if that's obscuring or not, because it seems like my image is on the screen, but the Saturn has moved down to the lower right from upper center to the right to the lower right, and you can see the movement of Saturn on the 3 days, or 6 days total, or again 4 days, 2 days, and then 2 days. Okay, we'll move on to out of our solar system and into the deep sky, what we call the deep sky. And in this presentation, I'm going to call intragalactic, because these are within the Milky Way galaxy. And I've included the Messier objects that in their list that are in this classification. This is an open cluster, and I'm going to ask Richard to talk about his capture there, if he's on and wants to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm on, Ed. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, like you said, we've moved from miles to measurements to light years to get this picture. It was captured on January the 4th from my backyard in Farmers Branch. So you can, I'm sure a lot of people that have taken photographs are able to do it from their backyard. This object in the center with the blue stars around it is M35, and it is located 3,870 light years away. And if you look at the photograph, at about 1 o'clock is a much smaller open star cluster, NGC 2158, and it is 14,700 light years away. So it's getting quite a bit further out. Both of these objects are in the constellation Gemini. M35 is also very pretty just for visual observation, just in the eyepiece. It's better from a dark site, but you can actually see it in the city if you have a decent size, probably, on a 4.5 inch or a larger telescope. You can start to see a lot of the stars in the open star cluster. I always like looking at it. It does remind me somewhat of a loose globular cluster because it is a pretty dense grouping of stars for an open star cluster. To get the capture, I used just a standard Canon 80D DSLR. I put it on the back of an Astrotech 80 millimeter ED telescope. That was basically my camera lens. I had that on an Ioptron IEQ 30 Pro mount. For the polar alignment, I used the Ioptron iPolar equipment and software. I did use a guide camera to capture this. I used a ZWO 120 millimeter mini, and then for guiding, I used PhD2, which is freeware you can get off the internet. To control everything camera related, I used another really good program called Backyard EOS. I took 60 images, 60 seconds each of the star cluster, and then I added some dark exposures for contrast, and then I stacked everything in Deep Sky Stacker, and I processed it in Photoshop to get some of the color back into the picture from doing the capture after I got rid of all the sky glow from Farmers Branch. So I really like taking open star clusters because I think they're very pretty. And thanks for sharing.
Perfect. Nice. Thank you, Richard. Great discussion.
You bet.
I was going to add something when I looked at the photograph and noticed the NGC 2158. I looked it up, and as Richard mentioned, it's like 4 times as far away as M35. But interestingly enough, only last month there was some major astronomical investigation of that star cluster. It's right on the edge of the Milky Way galaxy. And if you look it up on the internet, you'll find some synopses of the papers of the analysis. It's a rather interesting star cluster. Has some interesting characteristics that astronomers are studying now. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
It's interesting too many times. One of the things I noticed when I was putting these slides together, how many of the Messier objects are either globular clusters or open clusters. And if realizing that these M classification, these discoveries by Charles Messier were made in the 1770s, 1760s, that time frame, and he was using what we would call today your first Christmas telescopes. An 80 or 90 millimeter achromat, some of them non-achromatic. I think his favorite telescope was a 3.5 inch f12 and one of the very first achromats made by Dollard in England. So what we often end up with our first telescope, a 4-inch reflector, a 3-inch, 90, 80, 90 millimeter refractor, were state-of-the-art instruments when Charles Messier was making his discoveries. And on the list, he has 28 open clusters. And we'll go on to globular clusters. And he has 29 globular clusters on the list. And what becomes obvious in my mind is star clusters are very bright. They're not like the nebula. And they're very reachable for folks with modest equipment. 3-inch, 4-inch refractors, 4-inch reflectors, 6-inch reflectors. All of these are objects you can observe and photograph through very modest equipment. So it's something for newcomers to think about. And again, star clusters are less affected by our light pollution. So these are things you can pick up from your backyard and really enjoy. And there's a lot to discover, a lot to investigate. So it's wanted to be encouraging. Dave, are you on to talk about your capture of M13? Yeah, I believe Dave Cox said he works at night, and I don't know if I don't think he's on. So unfortunately, he won't be able to talk too much about it. But most of these photographs I pulled off the Groups IO. So if you are interested in what Dave and other folks have done, you can go into Groups IO and do a search, and you can put in M13 in the little search box, and all the postings from the folks in the club that have done pictures of M13 are there, and they often talk about the equipment they used and what they did. So not to be discouraged, the information is out there, and it's available on a Groups IO. There's a wealth of information out there for our Fort Worth members. Okay, we're going to jump into planetary nebula. And again, on organization, I put this together based on different objects and roughly on how far away these things are from where we sit talking about them. And I'm going to try Jerry again. I don't know if you got your microphone fixed or able to unmute. Are you out there, Jerry? Okay. Yeah, I don't know if it's just one of those internet things. I hope Jerry's on and just able to watch along with the rest of us. The planetary nebula are very much like planets in that they're small and relatively bright. But Messier only has 4 of them on his list. And,
Ed, can you hear me?
Oh, great, Jerry. Thank you.
Hey guys, sorry about that. I don't know what's been going on, but I've tried a few things trying to get this audio to work. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I'll say a few words on this one, and then I'll leave it up to you. If you want, you can jump back to the comment. But I like to have a story for every single one of my images. Every image, I believe, has a story, the location, the night, that date and time. And this one here is no exception. This is just a general RGB image taken with a Skywatcher Esprit 150. It was taken at the Three Rivers campus out in Crowell, Texas. The sky on this particular night was absolutely amazing. This is actually one of the cleanest images I ever pulled off of that optical system. This image was so clean that the 5-minute subs, if you look real close, you can just see the outer O3 bands outside of the nebula.
Mm-hmm.
These are really hard to pick up with just a blue filter and not an O3 filter, more especially on 5-minute subs. But the color came out really great on this image. We were out at 3RF and we were I think we were participating in one of their Messier marathons. But on this particular night, the sky was absolutely crystal clear. I could not understand why the sky was so much clearer on this night versus other nights that I visited, but the sky on this particular evening would have rivaled something you would see at Okie-Tex or TSP, 100%.
I can flip back. Well, how about if you just tell us a little bit about the Comet Lovejoy photo?
Sure. The Lovejoy photo was taken several years ago. It was imaged with a Canon 70 to 200 zoom lens and a Canon 6D camera that was modified. It was shot at 135 millimeter on the zoom scale, and it was a single 3-minute exposure. I had taken several exposures that evening and tried to do the comet stacking. If you'll notice, that image also has M45, so the comet stacking became an issue for me. I started flipping through the subs, and I just realized, you know what? I just plucked a single sub out of the mix that looked good and went ahead and processed it. One of the things to kind of note about this image is the sky was relatively clear. It was taken from Springtown, Texas. If you notice, the image in the background kind of looks like it has a dirty feel to it. There's actually a lot of really dark nebula in that part of the sky around the M45 region. And even this 3-minute sub with the camera and the lens stopped at f3.5 picked up some of that. So that's kind of what you see there. So we have Lovejoy at 135 millimeter, M45 in the same frame. I tried when I knew this was going to happen. I really don't shoot too many comets. I know they're very beautiful when done. I just kind of thought it would be neat to capture an image of this comet as it was buzzing by M45. M45 is one of my favorite objects in the night sky, so it just kind of went hand in hand.
Thanks, Jerry. It's a neat positioning of the comet and M45. And what struck me is the color of the nebulosity around M45 pretty much matches the color of the ion glow of the comet.
Right.
Yeah. So, but once again, this was on a tracking mount?
Actually, it was, yes. It was. I set the mount up to track, and it was just a single 3-minute sub.
Right. But again, all things considered, a good quality zoom lens or a fixed focus lens with a 35 or the DSLR, digital single lens reflex, you can really do a lot of amazing things if you also add a tracking mount to it.
Absolutely.
you don't really have to have a 10 or 12-inch telescope to pick up some beautiful deep sky objects. So let me zoom forward here to the next one, and this is the Owl Nebula by Dave. And again, I don't think Dave is on tonight, but this is one of the four planetary nebula in the Messier catalog. Really cool photograph. It's an interesting object. It's too bad Dave wasn't on to talk about it. All right, we're going to jump into a mission nebula, and this is the Rosette Nebula. It's not actually in the Messier catalog. Messier actually has 6 emission nebula in his catalog, but I'll let Jim, I think you're on. You want to talk about?
I am. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
All right. Yeah. Well, this image is a testament to my equipment being a lot better than me, because I'm quite the newbie when it comes to deep space. And this was the first deep space image with my Christmas present to myself, which was a William Optics 81 millimeter triplet refractor on an Ioptron GMC 45 mount, which, by the way, is a fantastic mount. And it also shows that exposure can mean a lot, because this was taken with a almost full moon just about 20 degrees above the nebula. So it was, I think I'm looking at my astrobin, and it was a 71% full moon, 71% moon. So it was almost full. So lots of, and if you see in the picture, you can see I didn't do a great job getting a lot of the light pollution out. But this is 100 images, 100 2-minute images. So it's 3.5 hours of data. And it was without any filter. So this was my first one. And I think this was before I was using ASI Air. And I think I did this on deep space. My next one, when you get to it, I had some different processes. But and so if I did that, I'd love to do this one again with my new equipment and new filter and see how it comes out. But I thought I was still pretty pleased with how it came out, even though there's a lot of flaws in it. But it does show that even in an almost full moon, you can get a pretty good capture. And I think someone mentioned this one's 5,500 light years away. So it's getting out there.
All right, thank you, Jim. Yeah, it's one of the ones I wonder how Messier missed, but
yeah, it's a beautiful nebula.
Yeah. And George, I don't know if you're on. George got this fantastic picture of the Fishhead Nebula.
I'm here, sir.
All right, can you talk about your photo?
This was taken with a refractor, a 127 Explorer Scientific, using a monochrome camera, the ZWO ASI 1600 GT, and I used the Astrodon 5 nanometer hydrogen alpha, sulfur, and oxygen 3 filters. Basically, this is taken from the backyard of a Bortle 7 sky. Processed through PixInsight. Let's see what else. And that's the big deal about the narrowband imaging, like I did with this, is that you get a lot of the contrasty stuff rather than the soft stuff that I usually get when I shoot with my one-shot color and like a narrow, what do you call that? The Optilong L Pro or L Extreme filter. This little camera that I've got that I've been using recently does a very good job of doing this, and it's basically 113 300 or 5-minute exposures of each one of those filters. So several, I guess, 113 divided by, or 5 minutes, 113 times, whatever number of hours that comes out to. I think it's probably somewhere up near 20. So it's done over several nights. The equipment I'm using is, like I said, the Explorer Scientific ED127, the ZWO 1600 GT. I own a Paramount Mighty. I do polar alignment using the actual Paramount utility within the SkyX. And normally, if I'm doing multiple days, I like to shoot when I know the weather's going to be nice outside. So I leave my telescope and everything set up. I just cover it up after it's taken its shots. And I also use an automation software called Voyager, which allows me to basically set it up, get it going early in the evening, and then hands off, I go to bed, wake up in the morning, it's done, it's shot its lights, all that good stuff. So that's basically it.
George, I was going to ask you, is this mapped into the Hubble palette?
It is.
Okay. Yeah, that was something I wanted to talk about as we went through the images, because folks that are new to astrophotography, and again, some of the both challenges and the techniques that are used to get around our light pollution and to also make things really jump out and stand out. What George mentioned is the narrowband imaging, which essentially is a black and white photo, a series of black and white photos, each taken through a different filter that only allows a certain spectrum of light to reach the sensor. And generally those are hydrogen alpha, the emissions from hydrogen alpha, from sulfur, and oxygen, I think oxygen 3. They all emit light in a certain band of the spectrum, and then through processing, we've mentioned PixInsight and some other software, essentially a version of like Photoshop, if you're familiar with Photoshop. Those things are given a color and then combined in stacks and layers. The Hubble palette, of course, is what the Hubble Space Telescope is using to map those particular lines of emission, or the lines of light that come from those different elements, and they give these colorations. If you were in the Starship Enterprise standing there staring at this out in space, it would not be this color. These are intended to really make it's very much scientific, but it's become artistic. The scientific is to be able to understand just what sort of gases are making up these nebula from a technical point of view, and also to penetrate through the light pollution, because our light pollution is generally in different parts of the spectrum. That's a real short synopsis, but we also shoot photographs with one-shot color cameras, and like George mentioned, we use filters to help filter out some of the light pollution there. And in general, those photographs are pretty close to what you would see if you were out in space as far as true color. Pretty close. Again, you have the problem of trying to filter out light pollution and the effects of the atmosphere. There's, even with no lights, there's still sky glow and problems with the atmosphere. So as we move out into the universe and want to get pictures of these very faint objects, the techniques and the equipment get more and more sophisticated. But again, with modern equipment, for relatively, I will say relatively modest investment, a good lens on a DSLR that's been modified, and some good quality filters, you can get some pretty amazing pictures. But at this point, you really have to be tracking. You really have to be countering the motion of the Earth so that you can get an exposure that's longer than a few seconds. We're talking 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on how dim the object is. And hopefully I didn't stumble too much and step on myself there. You know, I'm not the expert AP person. The folks that you're seeing here and listening to are the experts, but I wanted to throw that in for the folks that are new and maybe not knowing what Hubble palette means, or sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen, and those abbreviations that we often throw around.
And Ed, just to add to what you were saying there, the colors in this, when you combine them, sulfur is combined as a red, hydrogen alpha is green, and then you get oxygen as blue. So that's what you get, and you have to mess with the tones and things like that to get it to come to what you see in front of you there.
Right. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. This is Jim. This is another example of a mission nebula. A mission being that the gases have been excited by a star that's embedded in the nebula, and are emitting light in the spectrum of the particular gas. And Jim captured three: the Flame Nebula, and I'll jump into the Horsehead next. But the Horsehead silhouetted against IC 434, and there's another. Just below the Horsehead, there's another nebula there down to the lower left. And I don't remember offhand if that's NGC 2024 or 2023.
It's 2023.
Okay, 23. So,
and you can also see a little bit of IC 435 a little bit below it. So, yeah, this was the good segue. You mentioned taking a mono or single shot color camera. That's what I use for this one and for the Rosette Nebula. I have a ZWO 294 Pro camera. It's what took both these nebula pictures. This one I did use a filter. I used a narrowband radian tri-band filter, which lets Hydra alpha and Hydra beta, hydrogen alpha and hydrogen beta light in along with oxygen. So it definitely lets in a lot of the red, and it gets rid of a lot of light pollution. This one I only took an hour and a half. This is 30 frames at 3 minutes. Each frame was 3 minutes. And it was stacked on Astro Pixel processor, which you do have to buy, but it is a really good stacking program. I think it rivals PixInsight. I don't know if the total processing rivals PixInsight, but the stacking I've heard is probably as good. And this one actually, you stack it once and separate the channels into RGB. It has a deal to separate, so you create 3 files for red, green, and blue, and then you do 2 more stacks extracting oxygen and extracting hydrogen, and then you combine them. And on this one, the hydrogen is red, the first oxygen is green, and the second oxygen is blue. But you're combining 6 files to come up with this, and then throw it into, after you do that, you throw it into Photoshop and do your levels and curves and star reduction and stuff like that. But this was taken with a single color camera with a radian tri-band. So this was my first one to take with that tri-band filter. And I thought it turned out pretty nice.
Certainly did. Beautiful. And it's a nice wide field shot too. Picks up a lot of information. Thank you, Jim.
You bet.
Okay, and then George, you've got your M8 and M20, the Lagoon and Trifid, and a spectacular field of stars there.
Yeah, it's almost to the point where it kind of interferes with the nebula that you're doing, although they do have applications now that interface with PixInsight that allow you to, if not remove all the stars, then greatly reduce the stars clutter there. But what you're seeing here is a 2018 picture. The picture is a true color picture because it's a one-shot color using no filters other than an IR cut filter to kind of keep the bloating from happening. This is done using a Edge HD 11 telescope, so a giant 11-inch light bucket. And on top of that, I'm using a Hyperstar imaging lens system that goes and removes the secondary mirror, so you're not reflecting to the front and then back to the back of the telescope, but just it'll hit off the main mirror and then focus through this lens system at the very front where the camera's mounted. So that's why you see that. And it's also it's an F2 setup, so it's extremely fast. This picture here took it was 45 second exposures, so not even an hour, probably not a little over a half hour, I think. But this was taken also down at the Davis Mountains at Texas Star Party, where they have really good skies, especially to the east and west.
Hey, George, can I ask a question on that Hyperstar?
Certainly.
Can you observe with that, or is that strictly for photography?
You can do electronic. There's
Okay.
no way that you can observe through it, because to observe through it, you'd actually have to have an eyepiece somewhere in the mix. And
Okay.
if your eyepiece is on the Hyperstar, it's kind of interfering with light gathering.
That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah. But it is habit forming when you go to the Hyperstar, because you can do an entire image in one night rather than having to stretch it out over several nights, or you can do several images, several objects.
Thank you, George.
Mm-hmm.
And this photograph of the Horsehead, Barnard 33, and we showed the Horsehead Nebula in the prior picture by Jim. Again, I'm going to ask if Dave is on. I don't know, sometimes folks come in late, so I'm just going to check with him each time. But I don't think Dave is on. One of the reasons I wanted to include this photograph along with the beautiful photograph that Jim did is that this close-up of the Horsehead brings out the fact that this is actually a dark nebula. It's obscuring the light behind, and Dave's photograph here very well illustrates not only the smoky nature of the Horsehead Nebula, as at the bottom of the Horsehead Nebula, you actually see where some of the light is reflected off the gas, and as it obscures NGC 2023 there to the like the 10 o'clock position, you can see where the gas is between us and the nebula behind it. And that three-dimensional effect really came out nicely in this photograph. You can also tell that this dark gas that we're seeing here is obscuring the stars behind it. Because if you look at the other side of the red band of nebula, you see all the stars in the background, but then you look to the lower left of the nebula and there's very few stars, and that's basically being obscured by the dark gas between us and the background. So, and interesting enough, and understandably, Messier did not have any dark nebula in his catalog. His telescopes were just not capable of resolving this type of image or information. And of course, they were not taking photographs at the time. It was only visual. And the Horsehead Nebula is very difficult to see visually unless you have an incredibly dark sight and a large, probably 12-inch plus scope. You might glimpse it, but it really reveals its details through photographs. The other designation Dave has down here is LDN 1730 is also, but I added the Barnard 33 as there's often multiple designations on these images, or excuse me, on these objects. Okay, So I'm going to go back to Jerry, and this is reflection nebula. A little bit different from the emission nebula in that the light is bouncing off from stars in front of the nebula, and that's what we're seeing is that reflected light. And this is, of course, is M44 or 45, the Pleiades. And there's one other reflection nebula in the Messier catalog that's M78 in the Orion complex. But to be perfectly honest, looking at those pictures of M78 and M42 in the Orion complex, it's hard to tell what's what, and it's all one massive nebula field. So how they determined it was reflection had to be by spectrograph and not by just visually looking at it. So, Jerry, story behind this one?
Sure, Ed. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. Yeah, so thanks, Ed. This image right here was a nice little effort. I think I took this image over a couple of nights. This one was taken from Okie-Tex Star Party area during the Okie-Tex Star Party, I believe in 2014. This was the first time I had ever imaged this open star cluster, and I wanted to do my best to try and capture the detail of all the dust, the surrounding dust. So I believe I went ahead and imaged 5-minute sub-exposures. This was also my first attempt at using flats. So this image does have a flat corrected field from a proper set of flats, and it was taken with a Skywatcher Esprit 100 and a modified Canon T3i DSLR. So one-shot color with a luminance filter. And it was obviously tracking, and I want to say I processed this sucker 3 different times before I finally settled on a result that I was able to live with. This target is actually one of the easier targets. I try to get folks to try and image. You know, I do a little consulting on the side for astro imaging. So when a beginner comes to me and says, hey, you know, I want to take an image of Orion. Well, Orion is a good target, and with a little bit of experience, you can really make that sucker pop. But if you're just starting out, this is a really good one to start with. It's easy to find. It has a lot of stars for guiding, a lot of bright stars for guiding. You really don't need go-to for this. You can just point to it. As long as your mount's polar aligned, you'll be able to track with it and guide. And then you just take some sub-exposures that are in the range of, 3 to 5 minutes, and the detail will start popping. And that's pretty much it on this one.
Hey, Jerry, I've been wanting to get Pleiades. I know you don't want to use a narrowband filter on this. You want to use maybe either light pollution or an IR cut filter. Do you have recommendations? Like for my one-shot color camera, would I use any filter, or what would you recommend?
Sure. This image was actually taken with a luminance filter, which is an IR cut filter placed in front of the DSLR sensor. It was actually a clip-in filter, if you're familiar with those. Because the camera was modified, the camera still needed to cut the IR. So a filter was used. And yes, to answer your question, I would recommend using at least an IR cut filter for this target if your sensor is wide open to the spectrum.
Thanks.
I have my understanding though of reflection nebula is because this is light that has the blue and everything you're seeing here is pretty much full spectrum. You shot this from a dark sky site at the Texas Star Party or Okie-Tex. I'm not sure which one you said.
Yes, sir, that's correct. It came from Okie-Tex skies. The on this particular trip, every night of that week was crystal clear.
Yeah,
I remember
believe
having
this...
a really long drive home because I was so tired.
Yeah, I believe one of the challenges of some of these reflection nebula is that you get a lot of interference. It's with the light pollution. It helps immensely to have the dark skies for reflection nebula.
Correct.
Correct me if I'm
Correct.
wrong. Jump in and just tell me I'm all wet. But
no, you're correct. And to back to kind of Jim's question, the only reason you really need an IR filter here is because this particular target has some bright stars in it. And if you shoot it with a refractor, you're going to get some star bloating. Have you ever seen a picture of a bright star that has an IR ring around it? So the IR filter will just eliminate that. And that's generally you see that in refractive optics. So not to dive into that deeply, but this is just one of those targets. If you're going to shoot it with a refractor, it would really be nice to not have any filter, but due to the brightness of the stars and the refractive optics, you want to at least put an IR cut in there, or the stars will just blow out on you.
And with respect to the Messier objects, Charles Messier had this down, and then you saw on the other list is an open cluster. And it's probably doubtful that with a visually through a 3-inch f12 refractor that he saw the nebulosity. He might have picked it up as a glow around the stars, but that nebulosity is difficult to pick up with your eye. It's something that really comes out in photographs, but not very well visually. Unless you really have good vision, you're in a dark sky, and you've got some decent aperture and a fairly fast telescope. Fast being,
Correct.
f6, f5, that type of thing, as opposed to f12 or f15, like a lot of smaller refractors are. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. Now we're back to George and another reflection nebula. This is the Wizard Nebula, and I personally, I'm going to say I really like this photograph, George. It's spectacular in my book. Well done. Oh, you're muted, I think. George, I can't hear you. You're muted. No audio, George.
How's that? Any better?
All right, there you go. Perfect.
Nope, I think I just lost audio as well on my side. Can you hear me? Do a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah, this was a very fun object to catch. And like you, I like the color as far as the blues and the golds and such like that. It is a narrowband image, so I did have to use the narrowband filters. And it's done through the backyard, again with the a little refractor, the 127 Explorer Scientific, and the ASI 1600 GT from ZWO. And this is done, I think this is one of my first ones that I did that I actually started using guiding. The Paramount is very good at not having to guide a lot, but I was seeing pieces of some of my photographs kind of start moving around. So I went longer exposure and started guiding with it. Again, this was done with a Starkeeper thing. I think it was 157 different subs at 5 minutes each, which comes out to about 13 hours. And dark moon average was about 0.16% is what they were saying. But yeah, if you saw my backyard, you'd wonder how in the heck I could get something like this, because I've got like 20 different trees in a small residential lot. And it's imaginative trimming of the trees and moving my telescope north and south on a line so that I can actually gain access to an object for a specific amount of time. So that is where that came from.
All right. Thank you, George. And let's move on. And the other class type of nebula is the supernova remnants. Whereas the planetary nebula are basically average size stars that go through the end of the life cycle. They expand out, puff out some gas, and usually there's a neutron star in the center of it that's lighting everything up. The supernovas are a whole different category. They explode. They've had supernova that put out as much light as a galaxy in the past, for a very brief period of time. And the gas expands outward. And this one happens to be NGC 6992, the eastern part of the Veil Nebula. Messier had one object in his catalog that is a supernova remnant, and of course that was the first one, the Crab Nebula, M1. Unfortunately, I don't think, I'm going to ask again if Dave ever came on. Again, I don't have the details on his capture for this, but I do believe this is also narrowband imaging, Hubble palette. At least hydrogen and oxygen. I don't know if he has sulfur in that, if it's an SHO or an HOO, but it was a striking photograph, and this is only a portion of the nebula, the very large complex of nebula from a very old supernova remnant, whereas the Crab Nebula is quite small, and it was seen in, I believe, it was either 1054 or 1154. I think it was 1054. It was recorded by the Chinese and I believe by Persian astronomers as a star that suddenly appeared in the sky. And in the intervening 1,000 years, the cloud of gas has been expanding, and we see it now as a nebula. But its explosion was recorded in human history. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of the Crab Nebula. Maybe next year we'll have one in a presentation. Okay, we're going to move outside of the galaxy, and this is probably one of the most photographed galaxies, and one of the first things that folks look at. It's a giant object in the sky, even though it's nowadays is difficult to see naked eye. It is a naked eye object. It's the Andromeda Nebula, and it's in our local group. And George, talk about it.
Certainly. Hopefully you can hear me again. Let's see. This was done with the Edge HD11, so the giant light bucket. It was a one-shot color camera that I used, the ASI 071 MC Pro. Still using the Mighty as far as the mount. And it's 30 90-second images or subs. And it was taken out at the the Thompson Ranch. So no filters. Well, I can say no filters. It had an L Pro filter on there, which is a broad spectrum filter, which you have to use when you're doing galaxies. That, or you have to use LRGB on a monochrome camera. And since I'm not quite versed well with the LRGB stuff, and the site wasn't really dark, I tend to go with a one-shot color and the L Pro. But this is, like I said, 30, 90-second exposures, which is a little less than an hour, with a real slight moon. And this is one of my first images that I actually took a picture of when I was 17, and I had an old Super C8 and my film camera, or what was it, the Olympus OMG. And I always look back at this and think of that time when I actually had to do guiding by keeping my eye on the finder scope with the little crosshairs in it, and keep fiddling with the knobs to keep it in view for about 2.5 hours in freezing cold. So I remember it well, and every time I go back to do it, it kind of brings fond memories to me.
All right. Well, thank you, George. And the comment about LRGB, if folks are not, again, not AP folks or not astrophotographers, as most folks know, the light is broken into that we see. White light is really composed of red light, green light, and blue light, different broad areas of the spectrum. And to get a natural color photograph, like George was saying, if you shoot the object with the red filter, you shoot it with a green filter, and you shoot it with a blue filter, and then you shoot it with a luminance filter, which may be taking out ultraviolet or infrared, usually ultraviolet, and then combine them back together to get white light. And it helps, again, with cutting out some of the light pollution for each one of those exposures. But it means you have to take, for every one picture in a color camera, you have to take 4 pictures, and with luminance, green, red, and blue, and then combine them later in software. And that's what LRGB stands for folks that are new to this. And
also, be aware that a monochrome camera will be better used when you want to get a lot of definition in an object. Like all those nice little dark bands inside of the Andromeda there. If you used a monochrome camera, those would really pop.
Yes. And this photograph actually, this is actually 3 Messier objects. M31 is the main galaxy, but the one to the lower right is M32. It's a satellite to the Andromeda galaxy, and then the one in the to the kind of central left is M110, and that actually was not in Messier's catalog originally, this third publication, but it was added later on when it was realized that Charles Messier had actually observed it and made an annotation and note about it. So they added that to his list of galaxies as being M110. Interesting enough, the Milky Way galaxy, our galaxy, has 2 satellites also, but unfortunately for us, they're pretty much only visible from the southern hemisphere. Magellanic, I think it's the Magellanic Clouds, are some of the one or 2 of the satellites to our galaxy. This one, Jim has a picture here of M81 and M82, and Jim, talk about these.
This was my first attempt to try to get multiple galaxies. The one you see right now is Bode's. which is M81. You can't see M82 because the faces are in front of it. You can see there's two other smaller galaxies you can see, and there's actually several others. When you really zoom into the picture, you can see there's probably like 40 galaxies at least in this image, but a lot of them don't come out. This was taken, all these were taken with my William Optics 81 millimeter refractor on my IR tri-mount, and they're all from my driveway at Granbury, Texas, which I think we're a Bartle 5. This one I did use an IR cut filter on it, and it was almost 4 hours of data. It was 75 3-minute shots. And an interesting fact, I was reading about Messier. He really wasn't out there trying to observe all these different things. He was a comet hound, from what I read. He wanted to find comets, and he was looking. If he found something that wasn't a comet, he cataloged it. So he started his Messier catalog, and he'd send it out to other astronomers and saying, "Hey, if you see these, they aren't comets." So he really, his whole deal, he was wanting to find comets, and he cataloged everything that wasn't a comet. I think that was, well, we think of Messier being the kind of the main catalog you think about, and he really wasn't out there trying to catalog clusters and galaxies and nebulas. He was looking for comets.
Now, Jim, are you able to see the M82 now? I moved because you're seeing my screen, I moved the pictures of everybody over. So does my screen now show both M81 and M82?
Yeah, the way I have mine, it's not. I have my pictures on the left side, so it's blocking one of them. But you can see, like I say, obviously you can see the Bode Nebula galaxy right in the middle. Then there's, I think it's, you got one on the far left and then one up top. And there's actually, if you look, there's toward the bottom left, there's a fuzzy area. That's a couple of galaxies too that you can kind of see. But
yeah, Jim's absolutely right that Messier was not doing these. Actually, he cataloged all of these as fuzzy objects that could be mistaken for comets. So that people wouldn't record them and think that they were comets. And his basic point was, this stuff is just in the way of my comet hunting, and I want to catalog it so people don't mistake them for comets. Another interesting thing, we think of M31, the picture we saw earlier. M31 is actually larger than our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, but of all the Messier objects, M101, the Pinwheel galaxy, is actually the largest galaxy. It's 1.5 times bigger than the Andromeda galaxy. So it's just some of those unusual little facts, although it's much farther away, so it doesn't look bigger. And then Dave had a picture here of the, let me go back, of the Tiger's Eye galaxy. I think he shot this with a Ritchie Chrétien. I can see with the spikes, the diffraction spikes. But again, if you go into the group's IO side and do a search on Tiger's Eye Galaxy or Dave Cox or whatever, you can pull up the information he gave to the group on that one. I really wanted folks to talk about their own photographs rather than me just rambling on about somebody else's work. And then George, we're back to you with M51 and its little companion NGC 5195. And these are now in the category of interacting galaxies.
Yeah, and this one's done with the light bucket, the 11-inch Edge HD, and the Hyperstar. And that's why you're seeing such a grainy picture, is because I had to actually zoom in. As the Hyperstar is like 560 millimeter as far as focal length. So it's not really getting a close-up vision of it. For that, I'd have to actually stick it in the back, the camera in the back of the unit, replace the secondary mirror, and get somewhere close to about 26 to 2900 millimeters, and that would really give a lot of detail. Other than that, this was done from the front yard prior to my neighbors deciding they liked LED lights and putting them in their front yard as well. Little L Pro filter and the ASI 071 MC Pro one-shot color camera.
Okay, thank you, George. Now, out of interest, I included two numbers here, the ARP numbers, and this is for the astronomer Halton ARP, and he is a very controversial figure, but and we may get a presentation on that in the future, I'm not sure. But his specialty was looking at these interacting galaxies. So the two in the Messier list, M51 and M60, and the accompanying NGC object, because Messier didn't categorize both of them. He didn't have the optical capabilities to separate these things out. In ARP's catalog, are galaxies of interest the galaxies that are, you know, slamming into each other or orbiting around each other and tearing each other apart. And the next picture will give you an idea of what that looks like in a more dramatic view. And that is the antenna galaxies that Dave shot, NGC 4038 and 4039. And you can see the trail, those antennae are trails of stars, and you can see two galaxies colliding there. It's a rather spectacular view of what's the interaction between two galaxies, and these are quite a ways away. So unfortunately, Dave's not on to talk about his, you know, how he captured these, but it's a nice picture. So now we'll go from interacting galaxies out to galaxy clusters and groups, and this is another picture that Dave put together. It's or took, and that is the Leo triplet. And it's obviously in the constellation Leo, but there are now, and I've moved away from the Messier catalog to some of the more commonly known within reach of their amateur telescopes. You know, the clusters. We're part of the, I believe we're part of the Virgo supercluster. I may be wrong about that. I'm not an astrophysicist, but we have the Coma cluster and the constellation Coma, the Leo cluster, and the Leo triplet, I believe, is part of that. The Hercules galaxy cluster, the Perseus galaxy cluster, and then there's some other groups, and the Stephen's quintet, the Markarian chain in the Virgo cluster, and the Leo triplet. And this is another galaxy cluster. It's the NGC 507 group that Dave caught, and that's in the constellation Pisces. And again, unfortunately, Dave's not on to comment on his photograph, but I think it speaks for itself. The number of galaxies that you can see, and it reminds me of the Hubble Deep Field photograph, where you just see galaxies going on into infinity and giving you an idea of the scope and magnitude of the universe that we're dealing with. But again, all of these are within the range of our instruments that amateurs typically own. and the cameras that are available today. So it's digital cameras have really opened a tremendous field of inquiry and art for amateurs. Stuff that 10, 15 years ago was almost unthinkable. If you were trying to use film, it would have been quite an effort to get some of the things that we're getting in a very short period of time. And with that, that concludes a tour of the universe from our Fort Worth astronomy group. And if anybody has any questions, I'll go ahead and try to field them.
Go.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to stop sharing. How's that? There we go.
All right, Ed, that was a great idea, pulling in all those different photographers. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you to everybody who contributed to that. And as I said earlier, I think we're going to have to make this contribution presentation some sort of an annual presentation, because it's just very interesting to hear from everybody. And I think Jerry Gardner may have wanted to say something about the APSIG group. Jerry, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. So since we just had a wonderful presentation on astrophotography and some of the images that everyone in the group has been providing, I would like to go ahead and mention that we do have a special interest group devoted to astrophotography. It's open to anyone who's interested. We meet on the first Tuesday of every month, and just keep an eye on the e-group for details, Zoom details and whatnot. But I just wanted to go ahead and throw it out there that our next presentation will be on Tuesday, February the 2nd, and we will have an overview of the ASI Air Pro, and we will also talk a little bit about some recent developments that have been discovered with the filters that Optolong is producing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Optolong L Extreme filter and what it can do for you and how you can maximize your processing. So keep an eye on the e-group for that. Anyone in the club or online that's interested in being part of our special interest group, everybody's welcome. You don't have to have any experience, just come join us. That's
All right.
it.
Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate that. And don't forget to get word out. Everybody watch the iOS group, and Jerry will get information on that to you. Okay, let's go on to our business meeting and just discuss all the detail stuff that we get to deal with. Again, just a reminder for those of you who are new to the group, because of the logistics of trying to maintain an accurate listing of current members with access to the e-group, the current policy is one email address per membership. So what we suggest for those of you who are joined as families is to have an account, like a Gmail account, that is something that everybody in the family can access online, and they can go ahead and get the information and still have the one email address, but it's accessible to by either 2 people or 5 people or however many need to on that. And again, a thank you to all of the new members. You've all been reaching out to meet up with someone, heading out to a dark sky site. So we do appreciate that and your respect for this rule. If you do reach out and you can't get someone to meet up with you, holler out at me. Sometimes people just don't check their email often enough, and a member may miss someone who is reaching out. So they may put word out, but they may not check their email after that. And likewise, those members who do post that you're going out to one of the sites, try to check your email before you leave the house to see if a new member has popped up and requested to meet up with you somewhere, because each of the sites has some place where you can meet close to a freeway or an easy to get to place, and then you can follow the new member out to the new site, because they are out in the middle of nowhere. That's got some of the best viewing. Talking again about outreach, again, the in-person star parties are still on hold. Tandy Hills is scheduled to start on March the 20th this year. It is still on the calendar. Pam has sent that calendar to us, and so if you need a copy of that, let me know, or we may have it even posted in the iOS group. But keep in mind that right now, we don't know what the societal situation will be at that time. So we just wanted to maintain the calendar. At the board meeting, we discussed obviously keeping an eye on trends and the governor's rules and everything else. And we'll make a call along about March the 9th as to whether that party is actually going to hold or not. Realistically, probably not. But again, we'll make that call at the beginning of March. We welcome any of your ideas for safe sharing. I know we've talked about possibly getting some of the astrophotographers who work with computer screens up over there, so that it's something that people can view from a distance without looking through somebody's actual telescope lens. We'll have people who are there to help monitor, so that you don't have large groups of people looking at things, but maybe control, have the area cordoned off, and then control the number of people who get into that area to be able to view. So we are looking at ways to be able to do that in person, because even when we do start back, it is still probably going to be something where we still want to be very cautious and restrictive in some ways. Another item we're going to talk about is location investment research. You've heard this talked about in the past for a land search, and we're keeping that open. But in all of the talks among the club and among the board and among those very involved in working to find things like land and places to use, we're just sort of going to rebrand this endeavor, because it encompasses so many possibilities where the club can make an investment in new sites, whether it's for remote viewing, working with Palo Pinto Mountains State Park for an observatory, finding land that we can lease instead of own, but is still a good option for us. And you've probably seen on the e-group that Ed Gill sent a survey. So if you haven't filled that out, fill that out and send it back to Ed.
Thanks for bringing it up. I was going to ask that we remind folks that there is a survey about, what they would like to have in a dark sky site, and support from the club to the hobby. What's of importance.
Okay. Yeah. And have you gotten a lot of responses back yet, or just a few?
No, I've got pretty much a dozen responses, but there's 160 people in the club. So if I only get 15 or 20 responses, that's a small percentage. So I encourage folks, of course, if they inundate me with I've got to compile all the data. So
you asked for it.
Yeah, I asked for it. My fault.
But Ed and George and Mark Smith have all been working on, the best way for us to invest our money. And is it going to be purchasing land? Because that's not working real well for us right now. So we are looking at several different options, and it doesn't have to be just one option. We may be looking at several different possibilities, because again, we have varied interests in the group. One option for long-term planning is to support the Palo Pinto Mountains State Park. Especially those of you who are new, you may not be aware, but Palo Pinto Mountains State Park actually has an astronomy observation site in their plans. So that is being incorporated into the site. It is going to be a phase or two down the road, but We are looking at the possibility of obtaining a grant to maintain an observatory at the park and, partner with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Ed has joined a Palo Pinto Mountains State Park Partners, and the club has now joined. John Giramini went ahead and signed us up as a club, as a business, to support that organization. But we would encourage individuals to also become members of the Palo Pinto Mountains State Park Partners, because that's going to be one way we can ensure that they understand how important that astronomy observation site is. So anyway, we will go ahead and check on that. Ed, can you get that survey out on the membership form out to the e-group so that everybody has that and they can join if they choose?
Yes,
Okay,
I can do that.
very good. There's a question on the chat about UNT. John's answering them. We'll get back to that in a minute, and that John can address that when he comes up for the treasurer's report. Ed, Mark, George, do y'all have any other information to add to what I've just brought up?
No.
Okay. Let's go on to John Giramini now, our treasurer. He's going to have information to share with us. So, John, you're up.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
No, that's unfortunate. Let's see here.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you see me?
Yes. I was smart this time. I remembered to put that share screen for everybody.
Well, it's not the most convenient place, but hey, it is a place. So since last year, we've been doing a 6 months cumulative review of where we're at, where we've been. So in addition to the
That's the most money
January
I have.
data, this is a glance at our position as of December 31st and the changes that took place between July and December. So we were still operating normal, so to speak. We were at UNT. We had prepaid UNT Health Science Center. I get that mixed up because there is a facility in Fort Worth called Health South. Anyway, the money we paid them was totally refunded to us except for January and February. So I will contact them and see if we get some kind of answer on when they expect to be able to hold meetings again. As you can tell, the income is substantially larger than it was last year, and the expenses is substantially less. And the reason for that is the primary expenses, the largest expenses we had last year had to do with marketing material that needed to be remade. And that was quite an endeavor. I think Chris did, if not most of it, or if not all of it, most of it. So anyway, this is where we're at. As of the 31st of December, we have about 67,000 between the savings account and the checking account. And we're still plugging along at whatever it is, 0.0025% interest on that savings account. I think with 39 cents we made on that last month.
Excuse me, John, a question on that. Is it possible for us to put that in a mutual fund or something like that for greater gains?
I there's all kinds of vehicles for greater gains. The question is the liquidity and the amount of risk the club wants to take on. Over the last 2 years, the stock market has been thundering, actually, but there's never been a request to actually extend beyond a savings account. And I think some of that's going to depend too, when we get further down the road on this process of location, there may be a sizable chunk of that savings account that is expended. And certainly the budgeting for something like that is going to have to include, I would think, additional fees for increased insurance liability coverage, any kinds of utilities. I don't know what else. But right now, we just have those two vehicles. Good point, though.
Well, if we're not going to be spending that money for even 6 months, if we could get it up to 3 or 4% even, that would be a nice return. And, you know, this thing could go on longer till we find property or a site that we want to commit to.
Yeah, that is true. I did look at CDs, and the rate of CDs, even for 6 months and 12 months, were in the 2% to 2.5% range. So even those particular ones were not very high either. I can certainly reach out. I have a friend that's a financial advisor, and I can reach out for them and give him some, have him give us some suggestions on where we can do short-term vehicles. Any other questions on this? Okay, we'll go to the January report. So this reflects changes as of today, today. So did you, Michelle, did you pick up the last person on the list down here, Tom Benthal?
Yes, I did. I got
Okay.
him off of the Night Sky Network.
Good. Okay, well, if you're going to be doing that, then I don't see any reason for me to do this.
No, I usually will check Night Sky Network just for that reason.
Okay, well, I'm going to remove this then. So of course the bigger, or I think something that's pretty impressive is the 162 number. If we pick up 25 to 30 more people between now and May, I think that will be as high as I've ever known the club, but I'm not been here that long. I don't know what the highest numbers have been. I think when I was looking through the Prime Focus, somebody had a question about accessing some of the older versions that are out there. And when I looked at those, I believe one of them was, I don't know whether it was advert or whatever it was, they were claiming that it was 200 or more people in the club at that time. Sometime
We
in
had over 260.
Pardon me?
We had over 260 people.
Do you know when that was, Phil?
About 80 89 or 91, right in that area.
Okay. Well, I think this particular note was made sometime in the early 2000s, or maybe it was 1999. I don't know. Somewhere in that.
Yeah, we jumped for quite a bit, but we had quite a few people that were not within not within Texas. They had become members and kept their membership up and left Texas and came back and what have you. So we had a pretty good group going.
Okay. So far this year, we've only had 2 people actually request to be made into members, and they actually paid their dues and became members. We've had 2 other people state that they were going to take that action, but they haven't pulled the trigger yet on it. So, and I didn't notice. In fact, I saw very few new people on the list today, viewing today. We're still doing some analysis on the content of the hold harmless code of conduct, and the e-group accepted use policy, from a standpoint of whether or not everybody has signed those documents, and being able to validate the content of people that have supposedly signed. So that's still a work in progress. It's a sticky wicket, as I like to say. And I think that's it. Is there any questions about money? Good.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And then George, if you're still on here, do you want to talk about Prime Focus?
Just if anybody has any need or any way of any wish to do an article or have some pictures that they want to actually put in the Prime Focus, just let me know. Also, any ideas that they may have that we could use in the Prime Focus as far as segments or anything like that, that would be appreciated.
Okay.
So what's the criteria for a picture?
Well, it's got to be space oriented. In other words, within reason. It can't be a picture of the Starship Enterprise with you standing in front of it or anything like that. But it's going to be something like what we've been seeing tonight, for instance, deep sky photography or an event where the club was participating or things like that.
So a picture of something that's made with a 35 millimeter and a lens attached is not going to be considered a.
Oh no! I mean, if you've got a 35 millimeter camera and a lens, and you're taking pictures of the night sky, definitely.
We had some of those in our presentation tonight.
Mm-hmm.
You can even use your iPhone.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, George. That is all I think I've got on the agenda today. I'm just going to go ahead and leave the meeting open so that we'll officially adjourn it, but I'll leave the meeting on Zoom open so that those of you who just want to talk amongst yourselves have the freedom to do that. Okay? Thank you and good night.